Step back in time and rediscover 25 everyday items from the 1980s that Gen Z has never seen. From rotary phones to mimeograph machines, these once essential items shaped daily life in a bygone era. Before smartphones and touchscreens, rotary dial telephones were the standard way to communicate. These phones featured a circular dial with numbered holes, and to make a call, you had to insert your finger into the hole corresponding to each digit, turning the dial clockwise and releasing it. If you misdialed a number, there was no backspace. You had to start over. Calls were made through landlines, meaning you were tethered to one location while talking. Unlike modern phones with saved contacts, people relied on phone books or memorized numbers. Some homes had party lines, which meant multiple households shared a single phone line, leading to accidental eavesdropping or waiting for others to finish their calls. Can you imagine having to wait for your neighbor to finish chatting before making an important call? It could take several minutes just to complete a call, and long-distance calls were expensive. Despite their limitations, rotary phones were incredibly durable and lasted decades. They remained popular until the 1980s, when push-button phones and eventually cordless models took over. Before supermarkets and plastic gallon jugs, milk was delivered fresh to homes in glass bottles. A milkman would arrive early in the morning, leaving bottles on doorsteps and picking up empty ones left out by customers. This system ensured a steady supply of fresh dairy without refrigeration being widespread. Milk was usually sourced from local farms and was not homogenized, meaning cream would rise to the top. Customers often had a standing order, indicating how many bottles they needed each day. During the 1940s, the glass bottles often had a paper or foil cap, which people removed with a small tab. Some milk companies used tokens or tickets instead of cash payments. This service declined in the late 20th century as refrigerators became more common. Grocery stores expanded, and disposable plastic containers took over. But while fresh milk was a daily essential, keeping food cold was an even bigger challenge, especially before modern refrigerators. Let's take a look at the icebox refrigerator, the predecessor to today's cooling technology. Before electric refrigerators became common, most homes used iceboxes to keep food fresh. An icebox looked like a small cabinet made of wood or metal, with thick insulation inside. A large block of ice, typically weighing 50 pounds or more, was placed in the top compartment. As it slowly melted, the cool air would keep the food below from spoiling. To maintain the ice supply, families relied on ice delivery men, who brought fresh blocks every few days. People stored perishables like milk, butter, meat, and vegetables in the icebox. But since the cooling effect wasn't as strong as modern refrigerators, food didn't last as long. A drip tray or pipe drained excess water as the ice melted, requiring regular emptying. Iceboxes were standard in American homes until the late 1940s, when electric refrigerators became affordable and eliminated the need for manual ice deliveries. Today, antique iceboxes are collector's items, serving as a reminder of an era before refrigeration convenience. Imagine picking up the phone to make a call and hearing your neighbor's conversation instead. That was life with party line telephones, a shared phone service where multiple households used the same telephone line. Introduced as an affordable option, party lines allowed several homes to be connected to a single circuit. If one household was on the line, others had to wait their turn. Privacy was a big issue, since you could overhear others talking, gossip, and eavesdropping were common. Would you be able to trust that your private conversations weren't being listened to? A call waiting system didn't exist, so if someone in another house was chatting away, you had to keep checking until they hung up. Each home had a distinctive ring pattern, so people knew when a call was meant for them. While party lines were convenient in rural areas, they became outdated as direct telephone lines became standard. By the 1960s, most urban areas had private phone lines, though some rural regions still had party lines into the 1980s. During World War II, food was heavily rationed, and supplies were limited. To combat shortages and reduce strain on the food supply, the government encouraged Americans to plant victory gardens, small home gardens that provided fresh vegetables and fruits. People grew crops like tomatoes, carrots, beans, cabbage, and potatoes in their backyards, vacant lots, and even city parks. These gardens weren't just practical, they were a patriotic duty, as they helped feed families and freed up more commercially produced food for soldiers overseas. Posters and advertisements promoted slogans like, "Grow your own, can your own," to encourage self-sufficiency. Community gardening efforts helped neighborhoods work together to ensure everyone had enough to eat. By 1943, 20 million gardens were planted, producing over 8 million tons of food. After the war, the need for victory gardens faded as food production returned to normal. However, their legacy remains, influencing modern urban gardening and self-sufficiency movements. Before digital and battery-powered clocks, people relied on wind-up alarm clocks to wake up on time. These mechanical clocks required daily winding to keep ticking. If forgotten, the clock would stop, making people late for work or school. The loud metal bells on top, struck by a tiny hammer, produced a sharp ringing sound that was impossible to ignore. Unlike today's snooze buttons, once the alarm rang, you had to wake up and manually turn it off. Some models had glow-in-the-dark hands for nighttime visibility. These clocks were durable and could last for decades with proper maintenance. While they faded in popularity with the rise of electric and digital clocks in the 20th century, they remain collectible vintage items today, valued for their craftsmanship and reliability, especially in places without electricity or during power outages. But once people were up and ready for the day, they had to tackle their daily chores, like doing laundry. And before washing machines, that meant using a washboard to scrub clothes by hand. Before washing machines, people cleaned clothes by scrubbing them against a washboard, a wooden or metal board with ridges. Laundry was soaked in soapy water and then rubbed against the board to remove dirt. This method required physical effort, making wash day a tough chore, especially for large families. Clothes were then rinsed, wrung out, and hung to dry. Some washboards were made entirely of wood, while others had metal or glass panels to improve scrubbing. They were commonly used with wash tubs and hand wringers. The introduction of electric washing machines in the mid-20th century reduced their use, but they remained common in rural areas for years. Today, washboards are mainly found in museums, antique stores, and folk music bands, where they are repurposed as percussion instruments, keeping a piece of history alive in an unexpected way. Before electric mixers, people used hand-crank egg beaters to whip eggs, mix batter, and prepare sauces. These devices had two rotating metal beaters connected to a gear mechanism, powered by turning a side crank. Cooks had to manually rotate the handle at a steady pace to achieve the desired consistency. They were faster and more efficient than mixing with a fork or whisk, but required effort, especially for thicker mixtures. Can you imagine making an entire cake batter by hand without an electric mixer? Introduced in the 19th century, they became a kitchen staple in the early 20th century. Over time, electric mixers replaced them, making food preparation easier. However, some bakers and campers still use them today for their simplicity and reliability, especially in places without electricity. Vintage hand-crank beaters are now collector's items, admired for their craftsmanship and durability in a world dominated by modern appliances. Before photocopiers and printers, carbon paper was the best way to make instant copies. It consisted of thin, ink-coated sheets placed between two regular sheets of paper. When someone wrote or typed on the top sheet, the pressure transferred ink to the paper below, creating a duplicate. This was essential for business transactions, legal documents, and office work, ensuring there was always a backup copy. Carbon paper was widely used with typewriters, making it possible to produce multiple copies at once. However, mistakes were permanent, meaning an entire page had to be rewritten if errors occurred. The invention of Xerox photocopiers in the 1950s led to the decline of carbon paper. Today, it's mostly used for art projects, checkbooks, and legal forms, but its once crucial role in document duplication is now a relic of office history. Before disposable razors and electric shavers, men used straight razors, also called cutthroat razors, for shaving. These razors had a long, sharp blade that folded into a handle. Unlike modern razors, they required precision and skill, as one wrong move could lead to serious cuts. Most users sharpened the blade regularly with a leather strop to maintain its sharpness. Barbershops specialized in professional straight razor shaves, often using hot towels and shaving cream for a smooth experience. The safety razor, introduced in the early 1900s, gradually replaced straight razors, making shaving safer and easier. However, straight razors are still favored by traditionalists and professional barbers, as they offer an exceptionally close shave. Today, they are viewed as luxury grooming tools, requiring patience and technique, but representing a timeless piece of shaving history. Before modern gas and electric stoves, many homes relied on coal-fired stoves for cooking and heating. These heavy cast-iron stoves required coal or wood as fuel, which had to be regularly added and carefully maintained. They provided consistent heat, making them ideal for baking, boiling, and frying. But they also required constant cleaning to remove ash and soot. Coal stoves had multiple compartments, including an oven, warming area, and cooktop, offering versatility in meal preparation. Some models included hot water tanks, supplying warm water for household use. However, operating these stoves was labor-intensive, requiring daily fueling and ventilation to prevent smoke buildup. By the mid-20th century, they were largely replaced by gas and electric ranges, which were more convenient and efficient. Today, vintage coal stoves are seen as collectibles, valued for their craftsmanship and durability, and some are still used in off-grid homes and historic reenactments. But cooking meals was only part of running a household. Doing laundry was just as demanding. And before modern washing machines, people had to rely on clothes wringers to remove excess water from their freshly washed garments. Before automatic washing machines with spin cycles, people used clothes wringers to remove excess water from laundry. These devices featured two wooden or rubber rollers mounted on a metal frame, with a hand crank to press clothes between them. After washing clothes in a wash tub, the wet fabric was fed through the wringer, squeezing out water before hanging them to dry. Wringers significantly reduced drying time, but they required effort and caution. Fingers, buttons, and delicate fabrics could easily get caught, leading to damage or injuries. Some models were attached to wash tubs, while others were freestanding, making them versatile for home use. The invention of electric washing machines with built-in spin dryers in the mid-20th century made wringers obsolete. Today, they are mostly seen in museums, antique shops, and Amish communities, where they are still used for off-grid laundry in homes without electricity. Before television and digital media, families gathered around vacuum tube radios for news, music, and entertainment. These large wooden or bakelite radios used vacuum tubes to amplify signals, producing warm, rich sound. Introduced in the early 20th century, they became the centerpiece of the home during the 1930s and 1940s. Popular radio shows included news broadcasts, dramas, and variety programs, providing entertainment before TV became widespread. Radios were powered by electricity or large batteries, and stations played everything from big band music to presidential speeches. The rise of transistor radios in the 1950s made vacuum tube models obsolete, as transistors were smaller, cheaper, and more energy efficient. Today, vintage tube radios are prized by collectors for their craftsmanship and warm sound quality. Some radio enthusiasts restore and repair these models, keeping a nostalgic piece of early broadcast history alive. But while radio provided entertainment at home, capturing personal memories required something more tangible. Kodachrome film cameras revolutionized photography, bringing color to snapshots of everyday life. Kodachrome film cameras were among the most iconic photography tools of the 20th century, known for their vibrant, realistic colors. Introduced by Kodak in 1935, Kodachrome film became a favorite among professional photographers and filmmakers, capturing everything from family vacations to historic events. Unlike instant cameras, Kodachrome film had to be sent to a specialized lab for processing, making it more expensive, but offering superior image quality. The film's rich colors and fine detail made it the choice for National Geographic photographers and Hollywood movies. Can you imagine waiting weeks just to see how your photos turned out? However, processing was complex and relied on proprietary chemicals, leading to Kodachrome's decline when digital photography became dominant. In 2010, Kodak discontinued Kodachrome film, marking the end of an era. Today, Kodachrome images remain prized vintage collectibles, and some photographers still experiment with expired rolls, preserving the timeless magic of analog photography. In the early to mid-20th century, penny candy machines were a beloved part of childhood, offering sweets for just 1 cent. These coin-operated vending machines were often found in drugstores, diners, and train stations, dispensing treats like jawbreakers, gumballs, and licorice. Made of glass and metal, they were simple to use. Insert a penny, turn the handle, and a piece of candy would drop into a tray. The affordability made them especially popular during the Great Depression and World War II, when treats were considered a luxury. Over time, inflation increased candy prices, and nickel and dime machines replaced penny machines. By the 1980s, individually packaged candies and convenience stores made bulk vending machines less common. Today, restored vintage candy machines are collector's items, often displayed in diners and nostalgic-themed shops, bringing back memories of a simpler time when a penny could buy a sweet treat. Before digital recording and compact cassettes, reel-to-reel tape recorders were the standard for high-quality audio recording. These devices used large spools of magnetic tape, which were threaded through a playback mechanism and recorded sound with remarkable fidelity. Introduced in the 1930s, they were widely used in radio stations, recording studios, and homes for personal music collections. Unlike cassette tapes, reel-to-reel recorders required manual threading, making them more cumbersome but offering better sound quality. They were popular among musicians and audiophiles, allowing people to record live performances, interviews, and even personal messages. Despite their superior audio, they were gradually replaced by compact cassettes in the 1970s due to convenience and portability. Today, reel-to-reel tape recorders are collector's items, and some studios still use them for analog sound recording, as many music enthusiasts believe they provide a warmer, richer tone compared to digital formats. If you think this was it, you're wrong. Stay tuned. Before modern plastic IV bags, hospitals used glass IV bottles to administer fluids, medications, and blood transfusions. These bottles, introduced in the early 20th century, were sturdy but fragile. A single drop could cause them to shatter. 4 bottles required metal tubing and rubber stoppers, and nurses had to handle them carefully to prevent air bubbles, which could be dangerous if they entered a patient's bloodstream. Can you imagine the stress of handling a fragile glass bottle while trying to save a patient's life? Unlike today's flexible plastic bags, glass bottles were heavier and more difficult to store, but they provided a stable container for medical fluids. During World War II, they were essential for treating wounded soldiers on the battlefield. In the 1970s, hospitals switched to plastic IV bags, which were lighter, unbreakable, and easier to transport. However, some modern hospitals and laboratories still use glass containers for specific medical and scientific applications where plastic might react with sensitive fluids. Before USB ports and car chargers, nearly every car came with a built-in cigarette lighter plug, primarily for lighting cigarettes. This feature, introduced in the 1920s, consisted of a metal coil inside a cylindrical plug that heated up when pressed in. Within seconds, it would pop out, glowing red hot, ready to light a cigarette. By the 1950s and 1960s, nearly all cars had this feature, as smoking was common. However, drivers soon realized they could use the plug for powering small electrical devices like spotlights and portable radios. This eventually led to the creation of 12-volt power adapters, which allowed drivers to charge phones, GPS devices, and even small appliances. As smoking declined in popularity, cigarette lighters disappeared from newer cars, replaced by dedicated USB ports and wireless charging stations. Today, many vehicles still have 12-volt power outlets, but their original purpose as cigarette lighters has faded into history. During World War II, meat and other essential goods were heavily rationed to ensure fair distribution among civilians and military personnel. The government issued meat ration coupons as part of a broader food rationing system, controlling how much beef and poultry each family could buy. Households were given ration books containing stamps that had to be presented at grocery stores to purchase limited amounts of meat. Each person was assigned a specific meat allowance per week, and choices were often dictated by availability. Some families turned to home gardens, hunting, or alternative proteins to supplement their diets. The rationing system remained in place until 1945, when the war ended and food production stabilized. Today, original ration books and coupons are historical collectibles, serving as reminders of a time when communities worked together to conserve resources and support the war effort through shared sacrifice. Before electricity reached rural areas, many households relied on oil lamps for lighting. These lamps used kerosene, whale oil, or vegetable oil as fuel, with a wick that absorbed the liquid and burned steadily. Oil lamps provided a warm, steady glow, but they required regular maintenance, including trimming wicks, refilling oil, and cleaning soot from the glass chimney. In the 1940s and earlier, they were common in rural homes, farms, and even city areas with unreliable electricity. While effective, oil lamps posed a fire hazard if knocked over, and the fumes could be irritating in poorly ventilated spaces. As electric lighting became widespread in the mid-20th century, oil lamps were gradually phased out. However, they remain nostalgic collector's items today, still used for decorative purposes, camping, and emergency lighting when power outages occur, keeping this historical lighting method relevant in the modern world. Before cell phones and instant messaging, public phone booths were the only way to make a call when away from home. These enclosed booths, often made of glass and metal, housed a payphone that required coins to operate. Calls were made by inserting nickels, dimes, or quarters, dialing the number, and listening for an operator or ringing tone. Phone booths were everywhere, on street corners, airports, train stations, and shopping centers, providing a crucial service for travelers, workers, and people needing to contact home. However, they also had downsides: long lines during busy times, broken or vandalized phones, and the struggle to find the right change. The rise of mobile phones in the 1990s made payphones nearly obsolete, and by the early 2000s, most booths disappeared. Today, vintage phone booths can be found in some cities, often repurposed as mini libraries, Wi-Fi stations, or nostalgic photo spots. But communication wasn't just about making calls. Offices and schools relied on mimeograph machines to quickly copy important documents before photocopiers took over. Before photocopiers and laser printers, offices, schools, and businesses used mimeograph machines to duplicate documents. These machines work by forcing ink through a waxed stencil onto paper, allowing for mass production of documents quickly and cheaply. First introduced in the late 19th century, mimeographs were widely used in the 1940s through the 1960s for printing newsletters, worksheets, and flyers. The process was messy, requiring users to hand crank the machine while managing strong-smelling ink that often smudged on freshly printed pages. Can you imagine manually cranking out hundreds of copies for a school or office? Despite their limitations, mimeographs were cheaper and more efficient than early printing presses. The invention of Xerox photocopiers in the 1950s and 1960s gradually made mimeographs obsolete, as copy machines offered cleaner, faster, and higher quality reproductions. Today, mimeograph machines are rarely used, mostly seen in museums, historical collections, and vintage office equipment displays, serving as a reminder of early document duplication. Before plastic ice cube trays became common, people used metal ice trays with a built-in lever to break the cubes free. These trays were made of aluminum or stainless steel, and ice cubes often stuck to the metal, making removal difficult. The solution was a pull-up lever that lifted a grid, cracking the cubes apart. Popular in the 1940s and 1950s, metal ice trays were commonly used in household freezers, soda fountains, and restaurants. However, they had downsides. Water needed to be carefully poured, trays could stick to freezer shelves, and the lever required force to operate, sometimes spilling cubes everywhere. As flexible plastic trays were introduced in the 1960s and 1970s, they quickly replaced metal ones, making ice making easier and less frustrating. Today, vintage metal ice trays are considered retro kitchen collectibles, often used by people who appreciate their durability and nostalgic appeal. During World War II, war bond posters played a crucial role in encouraging citizens to financially support the military effort. These government-issued posters featured bold slogans and patriotic imagery, often depicting soldiers, families, or Uncle Sam urging Americans to buy war bonds. Bonds were a way for civilians to lend money to the government, with the promise of repayment plus interest after the war. People were encouraged to purchase them at banks, post offices, and workplaces, with slogans like "Buy war bonds and save lives" or "Loose lips sink ships," reinforcing unity and sacrifice. War bonds helped finance weapons, supplies, and troop salaries, raising billions of dollars for the war effort. After the war, bond redemption provided families with a small financial boost. Today, original war bond posters are highly collectible, found in museums, antique shops, and historical archives, serving as reminders of a time when propaganda and patriotism were deeply intertwined. Before turn signals became standard in cars, drivers used hand signals to communicate their intentions on the road. These signals were simple but essential. Extending the left arm straight out indicated a left turn, an upward bend at the elbow signaled a right turn, and pointing the arm downward meant slowing down or stopping. Car hand signals were widely used from the early 1900s through the 1940s, as most vehicles lacked electrical turn indicators. They were especially important in rural areas and early highways, where miscommunication could lead to accidents. Can you imagine trying to navigate busy streets today, using just hand gestures instead of blinkers? As blinking turn signals became standard in vehicles by the 1950s, hand signals became less necessary, though they are still taught in driver's education for use in emergencies. Today, classic car enthusiasts and cyclists still use hand signals, keeping this vintage driving tradition alive, even as modern cars rely on LED blinkers and automated turn systems. I hope you enjoyed this journey through time, exploring everyday items from the 1980s. Which ones surprised you? Did any bring back memories? Let us know in the comments.